Hello, welcome to the channel Y Stories. Enjoy watching.
Your daughter from your first marriage is not needed here, declared my mother-in-law, arriving at our housewarming with suitcases. The guests at the table fell silent, and Carmen's mother stood up and calmly said. Carmen thoughtfully ran her hand over the freshly painted wall. The white color, like a blank page, like a new life. For years ago, she couldn't have imagined that she would have to start over, with a child in her arms, a broken heart, and a lost faith in people. Mom, look what I found. Lola ran into the room, clutching a faded photograph in her small fingers. Is this you and Dad? Carmen took the photo, their young, happy faces, the blue sea in the background. Their honeymoon in Benidorm, a cheap guest house, all they could afford. Javier hadn't been drinking then. He was still smiling, still looking at her with love, not contempt. Yes, darling. That was us, a long time ago. Why doesn't he call me? Carmen sighed. How could she explain to a 6-year-old that her father had chosen tequila over family, that the last 2 years of their marriage had turned into hell, filled with drunken rants and money disappearing from their budget? That when she finally decided to leave, Javier didn't even try to win them back, and 6 months later, signed the divorce papers without asking how or where his daughter lived. He's very busy, Lolita. Put the photo in the box with the old things. Okay. A car honked outside. Ricardo, as punctual as Swiss clockwork, another reason why she had fallen in love with him. Reliability, calmness, everything she had lacked in her first marriage. Uncle Ricardo is here. Lola ran to the window. He's got flowers again. Carmen smiled. Ricardo always brought flowers, even that first evening when they met at a mutual friend's birthday 2 years ago. He had apologized to the hostess for not buying a gift and handed her a bouquet of wildflowers he had bought from an old woman by the subway station. Carmen had thought, here's someone who doesn't shy away from his mistakes and knows how to turn them into charm. Hello, my beauties. Ricardo appeared in the doorway, handing Carmen a small bouquet of daisies and a chocolate to Lola. How's the move going? Good. Carmen kissed him on the cheek. My parents brought the last boxes this morning, and the furniture arrived yesterday. We've already put most of it in place. Ricardo hugged her shoulders, looking around the spacious living room, their new 4-room apartment, their family nest. A 20-year mortgage, the monthly payment that felt like a good heart attack, but it was all worth it for that sparkle in Carmen's eyes when the real estate agent handed them the keys. Where's my room? Lola tugged at Ricardo's sleeve until she got his attention. Let me show you. Remember, we picked the wallpaper with butterflies for you? The girl nodded solemnly, though there was a sparkle in her eyes. Of course, she remembered, she had personally picked out every detail for her new room, feeling an incredible sense of importance at the moment. Carmen watched them leave, the tall man and the little girl holding hands. They didn't yet have that unquestioning love between father and daughter, but there was mutual respect and cautious affection. Lola didn't call Ricardo Dad, and he never insisted. In time, if she wants to, he said whenever Carmen brought up the subject. Their relationship developed slowly. They had been dating for almost a year before Ricardo proposed. Carmen appreciated this slow pace. After the catastrophe of her first marriage, she needed time to learn to trust again. She carefully observed how Ricardo interacted with Lola, how he reacted to challenges, how he dealt with everyday problems. When he proposed, Carmen was sure she had found a true partner, but still hesitated, not because of her own feelings, but because of Lola. Isn't she letting a new person into their life too quickly? But when Ricardo first stayed overnight with them and woke up at 6 a.m. to make Lola churros in the shape of little animals, Carmen knew he was the one. The wedding was modest, civil registry, a small restaurant, closest friends. Carmen's parents, who had initially been wary of her new partner, quickly warmed to him when they saw how gently he treated her and Lola. But with Ricardo's mother, things were more complicated. Don't rush to introduce me to your mom, Carmen asked when they had just started dating. She thought it was important to first strengthen their own relationship. She doesn't really care about my personal life, Ricardo joked at the time. But from their first meeting, it was clear that wasn't the case. Dolores Garcia, a thin woman with piercing eyes, regarded Carmen like a strange insect, not hiding her skepticism. "A divorcee with baggage," she said, not even trying to lower her voice when Carmen went to the restroom of the restaurant where they were meeting. "Are you sure, Ricardito, that she's not after your square meters?" Later, Ricardo apologized, explaining that his mother was just worried and would get used to it over time. Carmen pretended to understand. After all, everyone had the right to worry about their children, even if the children were grown. When they decided to marry, Dolores Garcia took the news coldly. "I wish you'd found a girl without baggage," she sighed. But she came to the wedding. She sat with a stone face, didn't touch the cava, refused to take photos with the new relatives. She bought Lola a cheap doll, which she handed over with the words, "Well, since I have to call you my granddaughter." Maybe she just doesn't know how to express her feelings, Carmen suggested when they discussed her mother-in-law's behavior after the wedding. "Yeah, maybe," Ricardo replied uncertainly, but Carmen saw something like fear in his eyes. Was he afraid of his mother or of her reaction to their marriage? But the first months of married life were so happy that the warning bells got lost in the general noise of joy. They rented a 2-room apartment on the outskirts of Madrid, saved for a down payment on the mortgage, and dreamed of their own home. "Can you imagine, Lola will have her own room," Carmen said, browsing through apartment listings. "And we'll have one too, and a living room to host friends, and even a little office for your work." Ricardo smiled, hugged her, and talked about how they would choose furniture, how they would place a big TV for watching movies together as a family, how they would get a cat. Definitely an orange one because Lola loves orange cats. But when it came to specific plans and conversations with the bank, Ricardo became strangely silent. "Is everything okay?" Carmen asked, noticing his detachment. "Yeah, I'm just worried about the loan. It's a big responsibility." One day, she overheard his phone conversation by accident. Ricardo was standing on the balcony, thinking the closed door muffled the sounds. "Mom, I told you, this is our decision with Carmen." "No, I'm not planning to move out of her place." "Yes, with Lola." "No, we're not postponing the purchase." When he returned to the room, Carmen pretended she hadn't heard, but inside her, unease stirred. Why does Dolores Garcia think she has the right to influence their decision? And why doesn't Ricardo even tell her about such conversations? The search for an apartment took almost 6 months. They saw dozens of options, weighed, doubted, argued, made up. Their requirements were simple: for rooms, good transport links within their budget, but it was the budget that became the stumbling block. Prices in Madrid were high, and they didn't want to borrow more than they could afford to pay back. They turned to Carmen's parents for help, but they had just taken out a loan to renovate their house and could only contribute a small amount. The situation seemed hopeless, and it was then that Ricardo mentioned the possibility of financial assistance from his mother. "Mom offered to give us half of the down payment," he said one evening. "But there's one condition." "What's that?" Carmen tensed up. "We have to buy an apartment with an extra room for her. She wants to come and stay with us sometimes." Carmen remembered her surprise. "Stay? How often?" "Maybe once a month for the weekends, sometimes longer." Ricardo looked uncertain. "She's having problems with her neighbors and is thinking of selling her apartment. This is temporary, until she figures things out." Carmen hesitated. Time passed, prices increased, and the dream of their own home seemed further away. "Okay," she finally agreed. "Let it be a guest room. But we need to set clear boundaries." In the end, they settled on an apartment in a newly built block in one of the suburbs. The building had been completed only a year ago, the apartment needed minimal renovation, and the area had a good school for Lola. For rooms, a bedroom for them, a kid's room for Lola, a small office for work, and a guest room, which, as they had agreed, Dolores would use during her visits. "Shall we take it?" Ricardo asked when they came for the second viewing. Carmen nodded, feeling warmth spread inside. "Finally, our home, a place where they will raise Lola, celebrate holidays, and grow old together." The day they signed the mortgage agreement was both scary and solemn. The amounts listed in the documents were terrifying, but the real estate agent assured them they were lucky with the interest rate. "Congratulations, you're homeowners now," he said, handing them the documents and keys. They had taken Lola with them to share this moment as a family. Lola nodded seriously. "Now we will live in our own house, always, always." "Always, always," Carmen promised, not noticing that Ricardo suddenly looked away. Dolores Garcia had indeed transferred the promised 15,000 euros and legally formalized it as a loan, insisting on signing a promissory note. Ricardo assured Carmen that it was just a formality. Mom wants to be sure her money is protected. The preparation for the move turned into a real operation. They were packing their things, sorting the furniture, deciding what to keep, sell, or throw away. Carmen was making a list of necessary purchases for the new apartment. Lola was drawing her room in detail, including the placement of the bed and shelves for toys. Ricardo was handling the repairs. They hired builders to replace the plumbing and finish the bathroom, but decided to paint the walls and put up wallpaper themselves to save money. "I want to help," Lola declared when Ricardo was unrolling the first strips of butterfly wallpaper for her room. "Of course, my helper," he smiled, setting the little girl on the ladder and giving her a small roller to smooth the wallpaper. Carmen, watching this scene, felt tears well up in her eyes from tenderness. This moment, her daughter and husband together putting up wallpaper for their new home, felt like the quintessence of happiness she had dreamed of. For the past 2 weeks, she had often experienced such emotional moments, sentimentality, sudden tears of affection, or even irritation. Morning sickness, drowsiness, and strange food preferences remained her little secret. She hadn't taken a test yet, but everything pointed to pregnancy, and this thought filled her with both joy and anxiety. Dolores Garcia called when they were finishing the repairs. "When's the housewarming?" she asked without greeting. "Next Saturday," Ricardo replied, holding the phone to his ear while hanging up the curtains. "We want to invite the closest ones when everything is completely set up." "I'll come earlier, help with the cooking," Dolores Garcia interrupted. "And stay the night, of course. I'll sleep on the train, and from your place, I'll go straight to work on Monday." Ricardo froze, casting a quick glance at Carmen. "Mom, the guest room isn't quite ready yet. Maybe next weekend?" "Ricardo, are you not happy about your mother coming?" Dolores Garcia's voice rang with steel. "I've already bought the tickets." "And what's there to arrange? Just lay me down somewhere, I'm not a lady." When the conversation ended, Carmen approached her husband. "Is everything okay?" "Yes, it's just that Mom wants to come to the housewarming." "I heard, but why do you look like you've been given a terminal diagnosis?" Ricardo smiled stiffly. "You're exaggerating. It's just Mom, she's a bit peculiar, but everything will be fine, I promise." Carmen nodded, but the little worm of worry that had been stirring since their discussions about the mortgage began twisted again inside her. Something in Ricardo's relationship with his mother was off, something he didn't want or was afraid to talk about. "Let's invite my parents, a couple of close friends," she suggested, changing the subject. "Let's keep it cozy." "And Miguel and Angela?" Lola asked, as always appearing unexpectedly and already understanding the gist of the conversation. "Of course," Carmen nodded, meaning her old friends who had a son the same age as Lola. In the evening, when Lola was already asleep, exhausted from helping with the repairs, Carmen found Ricardo in the kitchen, sitting over a cup of long cold coffee, lost in his thoughts. "Hey, what are you thinking about?" She placed her hands on his shoulders. "About how lucky I am." He pulled her closer. "I have you, Lola, our new home." "But..." Carmen sensed something unspoken. "No buts," Ricardo kissed her on the forehead. "Everything is perfect." But as the housewarming day approached, Ricardo became more tense. He started smoking more frequently, a habit he had almost kicked during their time together, checked his phone more often, flinching at every call, and the day before the event, he completely shut down, answering questions in monosyllables and absent-mindedly. "If you're worried about your mom," Carmen began at dinner, "can I help with anything?" "Everything's fine," he answered too quickly, "just tired from the move." That evening, Carmen heard him whispering on the phone in the bathroom. "Mom, we've already discussed this." "No, I can't tell Carmen right now." "Yes, of course, I understand that you're worried." When he came out of the bathroom, Carmen pretended she had just woken up. "Did something happen?" No, he quickly slipped under the blanket. Mom called, asking what time to come. Carmen wanted to ask what else they talked about, why he couldn't tell her, but bit her tongue. Tomorrow was their first housewarming, and she didn't want to spoil the celebration with heavy conversations. Everything would be fine, they would manage. As she fell asleep, she pictured how their new apartment would be filled with friends and family the next day, how they would raise their glasses to the new home, how Lola would proudly show her room. These happy thoughts rocked her to sleep, making her forget about her husband's strange behavior and the growing feeling of unease. Carmen woke up to persistent whispering beside her ear. "Mom, can we get up now? It's the holiday today." The clock on the nightstand showed 6 a.m. Carmen slowly opened her eyes and saw Lola, already dressed and groomed, with a look of eager anticipation on her face. "Sweetheart, it's still very early," Carmen whispered, trying not to wake Ricardo. "Guests won't come until after lunch." "But we need to prepare everything. Lola's voice sounded so convinced that Carmen couldn't help but smile. "All right," she carefully slipped out from under the blanket. "Let's go to the kitchen and make you breakfast." The new kitchen greeted them with the smell of fresh paint and morning sunlight filtering through the thin curtains. Yesterday, they had finally unpacked all the dishes and set up the appliances. Of course, there were still small things left to buy, like spice racks and towel hooks, but the main tasks were done. "Do you remember our old kitchen at Dad's?" Lola suddenly asked, climbing onto a chair with her legs tucked up, watching Carmen take out the milk from the fridge. The question caught Carmen off guard. Lola rarely mentioned life before the divorce. She had been too small when they left Javier, barely 4 years old. "Of course I remember," Carmen replied carefully, cracking eggs into the pan. "It was yellow and very small," Lola added, "and it always smelled like cigarettes, and you cried a lot." Carmen froze. Children notice much more than adults realize. She thought she had successfully hidden her tears, locking herself in the bathroom while waiting until her daughter fell asleep. "I'm sorry, sweetheart," Carmen approached her daughter and hugged her. "Sometimes adults get upset, but that doesn't mean it's your fault." "I know," Lola nodded seriously. "You cried because of Dad, because he yelled and didn't come to sleep. But here you don't cry, because Uncle Ricardo is good." Simple child logic that made Carmen's heart ache. Yes, Ricardo was good, despite his strange behavior in the last few days. The fact that with him, Carmen never once felt unwanted or humiliated made him 1,000 times better than Javier. Her marriage with Javier had started like a fairy tale. They met at a university party. He was a law student, ambitious and promising. She was an aspiring interior designer, dreamy and naive. A whirlwind romance, a proposal in their first year, and a wedding despite protests from both sets of parents. The first year was happy. They rented a tiny studio, worked part-time jobs, and made grand plans. Even the news of an unplanned and untimely pregnancy didn't scare them. On the contrary, it gave them strength. Everything started falling apart when Javier failed his exams and was expelled from the university. He got a job at a small law firm that paid peanuts but demanded full dedication. He started coming home later, smelling of alcohol more often. "I have the right to relax after work," he snapped when Carmen meekly reproached him. After Lola was born, things only worsened: sleepless nights with a crying baby, constant lack of money, cramped living conditions. All this weighed on Javier's frustration with his career. He started drinking seriously, first beer after work, then tequila with colleagues, and finally binge drinking on weekends. Carmen tried to save the marriage. She pleaded, threatened, cried, suggested they see a counselor, all to no avail. "I don't need a psychologist," Javier snarled. "I need you to shut up and stop interfering with my life." The last straw was the night he came home drunk, smashed the furniture, and woke up 3-year-old Lola, who hid under the bed in fear. The next morning, Carmen packed what she needed and went to her parents. Javier didn't even try to get them back. 6 months later, they divorced, and a few months after that, he stopped coming to see his daughter and then disappeared completely from their lives. Is Grandma Dolores nice too? Lola's question brought Carmen back to the present. Of course, she replied automatically, although an inner voice protested against such a characterization of her mother-in-law. She just has her own character. She looks at me strangely, Lola confided. Like I'm invisible. Carmen sighed. Lola was right. Dolores Garcia deliberately ignored the girl whenever they met. She didn't ask questions, didn't take an interest in her life, and didn't give gifts for birthdays. As if the very existence of a child from a previous marriage angered her. You know, Carmen sat next to her daughter. Some adults need time to get used to new people in their lives. Grandma Dolores just hasn't realized what a wonderful girl you are yet. What if she never realizes? Lola looked at her mother with serious eyes. Then it will be her problem and her loss, Carmen answered firmly. Because you are the most wonderful thing in my life. Their first meeting with Dolores Garcia still stood vividly in Carmen's mind. She had worn her best dress, styled her hair, and applied subtle makeup. She wanted to make a good impression on her beloved's mother. The restaurant was not expensive, but cozy. Ricardo was more nervous than usual, constantly adjusting his tie and checking the time. She's always late, he explained, noticing Carmen's questioning look, and then she reprimands everyone for being disorganized. Dolores Garcia appeared at the restaurant door like a creditor arriving at a debtor's house, with an expression on her face that said, I'm here on important and unpleasant business. Tall, slim, in a strict suit with perfect hair, she looked younger than her years and carried herself with the confidence of someone used to being in charge. Ricardo, she nodded at her son, ignoring Carmen's outstretched hand, will you introduce us? Mom, this is Carmen, my girlfriend. Carmen, this is my mom, Dolores Garcia. Nice to meet you, Carmen smiled, feeling the tension rising inside her. We'll see, Dolores Garcia responded coldly, sitting down at the table. Ricardo hasn't told me much about you, only that you're divorced and have a child. The entire evening felt like an interrogation. Dolores Garcia asked questions about Carmen's work, her ex-husband, her financial situation, and her future plans. She asked curtly, not waiting for complete answers, and every time Carmen replied, Dolores pinched her lips disapprovingly as if Carmen had answered incorrectly. Ricardo sat with a guilty look, trying to ease the awkwardness with jokes and distract his mother from her inquisitorial methods. What kind of man was your first husband? Dolores Garcia asked when dessert was served. Why did you get divorced? Mom, Ricardo began, but she waved him off. I have the right to know who my son is dating. We divorced due to irreconcilable differences, Carmen answered politely. My ex-husband had an alcohol problem, and I decided that wasn't the best environment to raise a child. So, you made a mistake in choosing your first husband, Dolores Garcia stated. What guarantees that you won't make the same mistake again? That evening set the tone for all their future meetings. Dolores Garcia criticized, asked uncomfortable questions, and wore an innocent face when Ricardo tried to stop her. I'm just looking out for you, son, she would say, and in her eyes, it was clear, I will never accept this woman as part of our family. The soft steps made Carmen turn around, and there was Ricardo, still sleepy, with a pillow mark on his cheek and a worried look. Why are you up so early? He stretched and yawned. We're preparing for the celebration, Lola proudly announced. It's our housewarming. Right, Ricardo tried to smile, but it came out strained. We need to hurry with the preparations. He mechanically poured himself some coffee, sat at the table, and stared out the window absently. Carmen approached from behind and put her arms around his shoulders. Is everything okay? Yeah, just didn't sleep well. He covered her hand with his, a lot on my mind. What about? Work, the apartment, everything at once. He stood up, kissed her on the cheek. I'll go shower and help with the preparations. Carmen watched him leave. Something is definitely wrong. Just hope it's not problems at work. With such a huge mortgage, losing our source of income would be a disaster. Mom, can I arrange the name cards? Lola tugged at her sleeve. I already have it all figured out. I'll seat Grandma Dolores next to Grandpa Francisco. They're both strict. They'll have something to talk about. Carmen couldn't help but smile. Her father, Francisco, was indeed principled and straightforward, but unlike Dolores Garcia, he was fair and kind. I wonder how their interaction will go today. Of course, sweetheart, she stroked Lola's head. But let's do the name cards together after breakfast. The day filled with hustle and preparations. Carmen made appetizers, Ricardo went out for groceries and drinks, and Lola decorated the apartment with homemade garlands and drawings. By lunch, the apartment had transformed. The smells of cooking food overwhelmed the scent of fresh paint. The table had a new tablecloth and candles, and there were vases with flowers in every corner. It looks beautiful, Carmen admired their work. Lola, come here, we need to get you into your festive dress. Where's Uncle Ricardo? The girl looked around. He's on the balcony smoking, Carmen frowned. Ricardo had promised to quit when they moved in, but over the last few days, he seemed to have smoked more than the entire previous month. She peeked out onto the balcony and saw him, tensely talking on the phone. Mom, I understand, but now is not the time. No, I can't just tell Carmen. Noticing Carmen, Ricardo abruptly ended the conversation. What's the secret? Carmen asked when he hung up. No secrets, Ricardo replied too quickly. Mom just calls every half hour, asking for details. You know what she's like. I know, Carmen thought. I know she controls every step you take. I know you're still afraid to disagree with her, and I know you're hiding something. But she said nothing aloud. You need to change. The guests will be here soon. Ricardo nodded and disappeared into the bedroom, leaving Carmen with a heavy feeling of unspoken words. Their married life had started in contrast to Carmen's expectations, easily and harmoniously. Ricardo had proven to be a caring husband and a good stepfather. He helped Lola with her drawings, read her fairy tales, taught her how to ride a bike. He was gentle and attentive with Carmen, always interested in her affairs and opinions. The only dark spot on the background of their happiness was Dolores Garcia. She called her son almost every day, often without reason, just to check how things were going. She invited him to lunches and family celebrations, but always only him, as if Carmen and Lola didn't exist. Can't you just tell her that we're a family now, and we visit together? Carmen asked one day when Ricardo was about to go to his mother's alone. I've told her, he shrugged apologetically, but she says she's only cooking for one and there's no room at the table. Ricardo, she just doesn't like us, especially Lola. Oh, come on, he pulled her to him. She's just old-fashioned. She needs time to get used to the idea that her son is now a family man. She's 57, not 87, Carmen retorted, and we've been together for a year. You don't know what she's been through. Ricardo's voice carried fatigue. She raised me on her own, without a father. She worked 3 jobs to make sure I could get an education. Of course, she's attached to me. This attachment is like a snake's to a rabbit, Carmen thought, but kept quiet. She didn't want to argue over her mother-in-law, hoping that in time, Dolores would accept her existence in her son's life. But the closer their wedding day came, the more apparent Dolores Garcia's dislike became. She began pointing out Carmen's flaws. Her makeup was too bright, her clothes inappropriate, her work unserious. Interior designer, she sneered, not serious. I worked in accounting my whole life, a stable, respectable profession. When Ricardo announced their engagement, Dolores Garcia had a full-on meltdown. You're making a mistake, she's a divorcee with a child. You're only 30, you'll find a girl without baggage and have your own kids. Why take on someone else's problems? Lola's not a problem, Mom, Ricardo tried to protest. My dear boy, you're too kind. You've always been like this. Dolores Garcia switched to the victim tactic. This woman is using your kindness. She's looking for a wealthy husband who will be a father to her child, since the real father ran away. That was when Ricardo first had a serious fight with his mother. He came back from her place pale, with shaking hands, but with a firm decision to marry, no matter what. The wedding went ahead, and Carmen hoped that formalizing their relationship legally would change her mother-in-law's behavior, but Dolores Garcia simply moved to more sophisticated methods. At the pre-wedding dinner, when Carmen's parents stepped outside for a smoke, she leaned toward her son and whispered loudly, "This wedding dress, isn't it too revealing for a woman with a child? In my time, divorced widows didn't throw lavish ceremonies." And when Lola, dressed up and happy, ran to the grandmothers with a bouquet of flowers, Dolores Garcia stepped away as if from a leper. "Oh, darling, be careful, I'm allergic." At the wedding ceremony, she sat with a stone face, and at the banquet, she demonstratively refused to congratulate the newlyweds. She drank more than usual, and at some point, loudly announced to her dinner companion, "My Ricardito has always been soft. Any sly woman can wrap him around her finger. I knew it would be like this." Since then, her tactics hadn't changed. She ignored Carmen at every meeting, pretended Lola didn't exist, and constantly hinted to her son that he had made a mistake. "Mom, how do I look?" Lola twirled in front of the mirror in her new dress with frills. Like a real princess, Carmen smiled, fixing her daughter's bow. "Will Grandma Dolores like it?" The girl's voice sounded worried, which made Carmen's heart tighten. "You know, sweetheart," she crouched down in front of her daughter, "not everyone has to like what you like. The most important thing is that you feel beautiful and confident." Lola nodded, but it was clear she wanted the approval of all the adults in her new family. When they returned to the living room, Ricardo had already changed and was arranging glasses on the table. His movements were nervous, his eyes darting from one object to another. "How are you?" Carmen asked quietly, walking up behind him. "Fine," he tried to smile, "just nervous before the guests arrive." "Uncle Ricardo, look at my dress." Lola spun around in front of him. "Very beautiful," he patted the girl on the head, but his gaze remained absent. "A real princess." Carmen sighed. Something was definitely wrong, but she couldn't figure out what exactly. Maybe Ricardo is just nervous about the celebration and meeting their parents, or maybe he's stressed because of his mother and her possible outbursts. The doorbell interrupted her thoughts. "It's my parents." Carmen went to open the door. On the doorstep stood her mother and father, loaded with bags of gifts. Mercedes, always elegant, looked especially festive today in a new dress and a holiday hairstyle. Francisco, a neat man with a watchful look, was holding a large box tied with a ribbon. "Sweetheart," her mom immediately embraced Carmen, "how beautiful you've made everything." "Grandpa, Grandma." Lola rushed to them, almost knocking them over. "My favorite granddaughter." Francisco picked up the girl in his arms. "Now, show me your domain." While Lola dragged her grandfather around to inspect the apartment, Mercedes helped Carmen arrange the snacks she had brought. "How are you settling in?" "Everything's fine, we're still just getting comfortable," Carmen smiled, "but it already feels like our home." "And where's Ricardo?" On the balcony, Carmen lowered her voice. "Mom, he's acting strange today, nervous, twitching." "Men always get nervous before important events," Mercedes wisely observed. "Do you remember how your father was nervous before your wedding to Javier? He didn't sleep all night, walking around the apartment." "Yes, but back then, Dad was right to be nervous," Carmen thought. His intuition was screaming that his daughter was making a mistake. "Maybe Ricardo feels something now that I don't notice." The new doorbell signaled the arrival of friends. Miguel and Angela barged into the apartment with loud laughter and a bunch of flowers. "Congratulations to the new homeowners," Angela hugged Carmen. "What a stunning apartment." Their son, Miguelito, immediately found Lola, and the children rushed off to the kids' room, leaving the adults to deal with greetings and gifts. By 5 p.m., almost all the invited guests had arrived, except for Dolores Garcia. Ricardo kept glancing at the clock, nervously fiddling with the button on his shirt. "Has she called? Said she's running late?" Carmen asked when they were alone in the kitchen. "No, she just said she'd be here by 5, Ricardo wiped his sweaty brow. "You know how she likes dramatic entrances." At that moment, the doorbell rang again, and all conversation in the apartment fell silent. Ricardo flinched as if struck by a jolt. "I'll open it." Carmen followed him to the hallway, feeling her muscles tense. A sense of unease hung in the air, like the scent before a storm. At the door stood Dolores Garcia, but not alone as expected. She was accompanied by 2 huge suitcases. Her cold, assessing gaze swept over the hallway and stopped on Lola, who had peeked out of the kids' room. "And what's this girl doing here?" Dolores Garcia's voice sounded like the creaking of an unscrewed door. Carmen felt everything inside her freeze. She looked at Ricardo, expecting him to say something, explain, or at least protest, but he stood there, eyes downcast, silent. And that silence spoke louder than any words. Carmen froze, watching her husband, who seemed to shrink into himself, avoiding meeting her eyes. The silence stretched like chewing gum, awkward and sticky. "This is my daughter," Carmen finally spoke, taking a step forward and shielding Lola. "You know very well, Dolores Garcia." Dolores Garcia pressed her lips so tightly together they became a thin line. "Come in, Mom," Ricardo finally spoke, taking one of the suitcases. "Everyone's already here." Dolores Garcia glided into the hallway, looking around as if evaluating property for an inventory. Her attention lingered especially on the new coat rack, where guests' coats and jackets were already hanging. "A bit cramped," she noted, "and this is a new build? I thought they were making more spacious apartments now." "It's a new build, Mom." Ricardo helped her take off her coat, still not looking at Carmen, "but it's budget class. You know, we're a bit limited on funds." Lola, who had been hiding behind her mother, cautiously peeked out to look at her grandmother. She was wearing her new frilly dress with a bow in her hair, a little princess ready for the celebration. Dolores Garcia glanced at her like she was an inanimate object and proceeded to the living room, where the voices of other guests could be heard. "Ricardo," Carmen quietly called as her mother-in-law walked away, "what's going on? Why did your mom bring suitcases?" "Let's talk later," he replied just as quietly, and for the first time, Carmen saw something in his eyes that she never expected to see: fear and shame. "There are guests now, let's not spoil the celebration." "No, let's talk now," Carmen insisted, but Lola tugged at her hand. "Mom, I want to go to Grandpa," the girl whispered, and in her voice was such worry that Carmen dropped her conversation with her husband. In the living room, Dolores Garcia had already taken the central seat at the table, as if it were her celebration. Mercedes, Carmen's mother, tried to make small talk with her but received only short, dry responses. "Where are your suitcases, Dolores Garcia?" Carmen's father, Francisco, who was always straightforward, asked. Ricardo took them to the hallway. "I'll have them moved to the guest bedroom later." Dolores Garcia waved it off as though it were the most natural thing in the world. Carmen felt a wave of relief inside her. "So, my mother-in-law doesn't want Lola's room. But why so many things for a temporary visit?" "Ricardito, pour me some coffee," Dolores Garcia demanded, and her son immediately rushed to fulfill the request like a well-behaved child. Carmen exchanged glances with her parents. Mercedes looked concerned, and in Francisco's eyes, there was a dangerous gleam that foretold a storm. "So, we've gathered here to congratulate the young family on their new home," Francisco began, raising his glass to the new home of Carmen, Ricardo, and our beloved granddaughter Lola. Everyone, except Dolores Garcia, raised their glasses. She demonstratively took a sip of coffee, grimacing as if it were sour. "So, is the renovation done?" she asked, addressing her son as if Carmen didn't exist. "I noticed unfinished work in the kitchen." "We're still working on some details," Ricardo answered, still avoiding looking at his wife, "but the main work is done." "I'll help with the design," Dolores Garcia declared authoritatively. "I have some great ideas for the interior, especially for the kids' room." Carmen felt a chill run down her spine. "The kids' room? But that's Lola's room, the one they worked on together, picking every little detail." "Actually, the kids' room is already completely ready," Carmen gently pointed out. "Lola chose the wallpaper and furniture herself." Dolores Garcia turned to her as if she had just noticed her presence. "You can't trust children with such important decisions," she snapped. "They don't understand ergonomics or practicality. The room should be functional, especially if an adult will be living in it permanently." "Permanently?" An adult in the kids' room? Carmen felt the ground slip from under her feet. She looked at Ricardo, but he was intently studying the pattern on the tablecloth, as if there were hidden answers to all of life's questions there. I think Lola's room turned out wonderful, Mercedes intervened, trying to ease the tension. Such cute butterfly wallpaper. Butterflies are childish, Dolores Garcia cut her off. At my age, you need something calm, neutral. I think beige wallpaper would be just right. The room fell into a heavy silence. Carmen caught her father's gaze. He was looking at her mother-in-law as if trying to solve a complex math problem. Dolores Garcia, he asked calmly, are you planning to live in this apartment? Of course, she took another sip of coffee. Ricardo couldn't have bought this apartment without my financial help. I contributed half of the down payment, and we agreed that I would live with them. I even have a notarized promissory note where he confirms this. Carmen felt nausea rise in her throat. She shifted her gaze to Ricardo, who finally met her eyes. The guilt in his eyes was so intense that there was no doubt left. It was true. Ricardo, don't you want to explain? Carmen asked quietly, trying to keep her voice steady. I was going to tell you, he began, I just didn't know how. What exactly were you going to say? Carmen felt anger rising inside her, that you invited your mother to live with us permanently without my knowledge, or that she's going to live in Lola's room. I don't understand what all this fuss is about, Dolores Garcia interrupted. Ricardo, my only son, of course, I'll live with him. I helped with the mortgage, I have the right to this apartment. And the guest room will be too cramped for me, it's just an office-sized room. Mom, we agreed I'd tell Carmen, Ricardo muttered, turning red. When were you going to tell her? On moving day, or later? Carmen felt a wave of fury and hurt. How could you? We chose this apartment together, we discussed every detail, and not once, did you mention that your mother would be living with us permanently. Lola, who had been sitting quietly next to her grandmother Mercedes, suddenly started crying. Where am I going to live? She asked through her tears. This is my room. See, Ricardo? Dolores Garcia threw her hands up. I told you there would be problems with this child. Children from first marriages always create difficulties in a new family. Francisco slowly stood up from his seat. His face took on the expression Carmen remembered from childhood, when her father was truly angry but keeping himself in check. I think we need to clarify the situation, he said in a steady voice. Ricardo, you bought this apartment for your family, meaning for Carmen, yourself, and Lola, right? Yes, of course. Ricardo finally lifted his gaze. But Mom, she helped with the money, and I promised she could. Help with what? Francisco cut him off. Live here permanently, take Lola's room? She's not his daughter, Dolores Garcia inserted, and why does a child need her own room? She can sleep with her mother or on the couch in the living room, but I need personal space. Carmen felt her vision darken with fury. She took the crying Lola in her arms and hugged her tightly. No one is taking my daughter out of her room, she said firmly, not now, and never again. The rest of the evening passed in a tense, unnatural atmosphere. Carmen and Ricardo's friends, sensing something was wrong, began to quietly leave. Miguel and Angela took their son and whispered to Carmen that they would call tomorrow. Only Carmen's parents stayed, not wanting to leave their daughter in such a situation. Dolores Garcia, as if nothing were wrong, continued to discuss plans for redecorating the apartment, completely ignoring Carmen's opinion and the obvious tension. The kitchen walls need repainting, she declared, surveying the room. This color is driving me crazy. And why so many pots? I cook simply, 2 will be enough. Carmen sat silently, holding Lola, who had calmed down. Her thoughts were in complete chaos. How could this happen? How did I not notice that something was wrong? And what do we do now? Ricardo, can I have a word with you? She finally stood up and gestured for her husband to step out onto the balcony. When the door closed behind them, Carmen turned to him. Explain to me what's going on, and don't even think about lying again. Ricardo looked as though he wanted to disappear into the ground. I didn't lie, he began, I just didn't tell you the whole truth. That's called lying by omission. Carmen cut him off, and it's no better than a direct lie. Did you know your mother was planning to live with us? Yes, he lowered his head. She offered to help with the down payment, but on the condition that she would live in this apartment permanently. At first, we talked about the guest room, but then she saw the layout and decided she needed a bigger room. I thought maybe Lola could temporarily sleep in the guest room until we found another solution. And when were you planning to tell me? After the wedding, after we bought the apartment, after we renovated Lola's room, which your mother is apparently planning to take. I was afraid you'd refuse. Ricardo's voice sounded pitiful. We searched for the perfect place for so long. You were so happy when we found this apartment. And now what? Carmen crossed her arms over her chest. Does your mother really think she can take Lola's room? And are you going to let her? Ricardo was silent, and that silence spoke louder than any words. My God, Carmen shook her head. I don't recognize you. Are you really willing to sacrifice your child's well-being just to please your mother? I thought we could find a compromise, Ricardo mumbled. Maybe Lola could sleep in the guest room. She's still small. Carmen looked at him in disbelief, as though seeing him for the first time. Are you serious? Her voice trembled with barely contained fury. Do you really think I'll agree to this, that I'll let your mother dictate how we live in our own apartment? Carmen, please understand. Ricardo took a step toward her, but she stepped back. Mom is alone. She's getting older. She needs support, and she really helped with the money. She has a legally binding right to live here. How much? Carmen asked. Half of the down payment, Ricardo admitted, 15,000 euros. Carmen took a deep breath, trying to calm down. And you think 15,000 euros gives her the right to destroy our family? Because that's what will happen if she stays. You're exaggerating. No, Ricardo, you're underestimating the situation. Carmen looked him straight in the eyes. Your mother just publicly stated that my daughter is an obstacle. She should be kicked out of her own room. And instead of protecting your child, you're silent and meekly nodding. I'm just trying to please everyone. Ricardo looked miserable. I love you and Lola, but Mom is my family too. No, Ricardo. Carmen shook her head. When a man gets married, his family is his wife and children. Parents remain parents, but they shouldn't dictate how adults live their lives. I know, but... No buts, Carmen interrupted him. You need to make a choice, right now. Either you go there and tell your mother she will not live with us, and she will not take Lola's room, or... She paused. Or what? Ricardo paled. Or you accept her terms, but then Lola and I will leave, Carmen said, surprising herself with her own words, but realizing that there was no other way. I won't let anyone hurt my daughter, even if that person is your mother. When they returned to the living room, the tension was palpable. Dolores Garcia was sitting on the couch, flipping through an interior design magazine and making notes with a pencil. Lola was pressed up against her grandfather, who was gently stroking her head and telling her something quietly. Well, have you decided where I'm going to sleep tonight? Dolores Garcia asked nonchalantly, looking up from the magazine. I'd like to see the kids' room, need to assess how much stuff needs to be moved. Carmen felt her body tremble with indignation, but before she could respond, Ricardo stepped forward. Mom, we need to talk. His voice was uncertain but firmer than before, alone. Dolores Garcia got up with obvious displeasure and followed her son into the bedroom. The door closed, but their voices could still be heard. Ricardo was speaking softly and incoherently, while his mother was getting louder and sharper. What do you mean, you can't live with us? You promised, I gave you the money, I have the promissory note. Mom, I didn't say you were going to take Lola's room. I thought maybe the guest room. The guest room? It's a closet. You're suggesting your mother live in a closet, like a servant, after everything I've done for you? The voices grew louder. Mercedes hugged Lola, trying to distract her from the argument. You know, sweetheart, she said to her granddaughter, let's look at your new books. Will you show me your favorite? But Lola, with an understanding beyond her years, shook her head. Grandma Dolores wants to take my room, right? And Uncle Ricardo is going to let her? "No, sweetheart," Francisco said confidently, "no one is taking your room. This is your home, and you have every right to your space." The bedroom door suddenly flung open, and Dolores Garcia stormed out, enraged. "Ungrateful," she shouted, "I gave you my whole life, sacrificed everything, and now you're choosing this divorcee with a child." Ricardo stepped out right behind her, pale but with a determined expression. "Mom, please calm down. We'll find a solution, but right now, you've made a scene in front of the guests." "I don't care about the guests," Dolores Garcia shot a furious glance around the room. "This was supposed to be my home. You promised I'd live with you, that we'd be together." "Mom, I'm married," Ricardo said quietly but firmly. "I have my own family. We can see each other often. I'll help you, but—" "Shut up," Dolores Garcia raised her hand as if to strike her son. "You chose them over me. You betrayed your own mother for strangers." "They're not strangers, Mom." Ricardo stood up straight. "Carmen is my wife, and Lola is part of our family, and I won't let you insult them." Dolores Garcia froze, as if she couldn't believe her ears. Then her face twisted with rage. "Fine," she spun on her heel and headed for the door, "but I'm taking my money back. Give me my 15,000 euros right now. I'll go to court with the promissory note you signed." "Mom, we've already made the down payment. The money is at the bank." "Then sell the apartment," she snapped, "or borrow from anyone, but I want the money in my account within a month, or I'll take you to court." With that, she flung the door open and stormed out, slamming it so hard the windows shook. A heavy silence hung in the apartment. When the shock of Dolores Garcia's departure subsided a little, Carmen took Lola to her room and asked her to play with Miguelito, who, fortunately, didn't understand the nature of the conflict and was happy to explore the new territory. The adults remained in the living room, trying to process what had just happened. 15,000 euros, Francisco said thoughtfully. "It's not a small amount, but not enough to sell your soul for." "Dad," Carmen rubbed her temples tiredly, "not now." "He's right, Carmen," Ricardo said quietly. "I acted like the biggest coward. I should have told you everything from the start, not like this." "Why did you agree to her terms?" Mercedes asked. "Couldn't we have found another way to get the loan?" Ricardo lowered his head. "I thought it was the best way out of a tough situation. Carmen's parents couldn't help with the full amount. The bank was asking for a bigger down payment than we had saved, and Mom offered the money. At first, it was just about the guest room, but then she started talking about living here permanently. And I chickened out, didn't want to ruin everything." "What are we going to do now?" Carmen asked. "We don't have 15,000 to give back to your mom." "I could borrow it." Ricardo looked defeated. "From friends. Maybe take a consumer loan. But with the promissory note, it might be more complicated. She really has legal grounds." "Wait," Francisco intervened. "Let's think this through. Dolores Garcia gave you the money voluntarily, but with conditions. The promissory note exists, but the conditions can be contested." Francisco was a lawyer, and his professional experience was exactly what they needed now. "In any case, we won't leave you in trouble. Mercedes and I have savings, not all 15,000, but about 10,000 we can give you now. The rest can be taken as a consumer loan. And we'll help with the legal side if it comes to a lawsuit. The most important thing is to return that money and get rid of her influence." "Dad," Carmen was touched, "we can't accept that much money." "Why not?" he asked. "We've been saving it for you and Lola anyway. It's better to give it now and close this unpleasant matter than to let the conflict grow." Ricardo lifted his gaze. I don't know what to say. This is a very generous offer." "Say that you won't let your mother dictate how you live anymore," Francisco answered, "and that protecting Lola and Carmen will be your top priority." "I promise." Ricardo looked sincere. "I understand my mistake, and it won't happen again." Carmen looked at her husband with distrust. His words sounded right, but would he keep his promise when Dolores Garcia started pressuring again? "Ricardo," she took his hand, "I want to believe you, but today we saw just how much your mother influences you. Are you ready to fight this, really?" Yes, he gripped her fingers tightly. Today I realized I almost lost the most precious thing because of my weakness. I won't let that happen again. Mercedes sighed with relief. Well, that's good. Now maybe we can finally celebrate the housewarming. The kids are probably hungry, and we could use something to eat after all this commotion. The morning after the housewarming was quiet and tense. The guests left late in the evening. Carmen's parents were the last to go, promising to return in a couple of days with money for Dolores Garcia. Carmen had a restless night, waking up frequently and listening to Ricardo's breathing beside her. He didn't sleep either, tossing and turning, sighing, getting up several times to smoke on the balcony, thinking she wouldn't notice. Lola woke up before anyone else and, as usual, came into their bedroom. Carmen heard the careful steps and pretended to be asleep, watching through her eyelashes as her daughter approached the bed and carefully studied the adults' faces. "Mom," Lola finally whispered, gently touching Carmen's shoulder, "are you asleep?" Carmen opened her eyes and smiled. "Not anymore." "Good morning, sweetheart. Did Grandma Dolores really want to take my room?" Lola asked without preamble, and Carmen's heart clenched at her child's directness. She just didn't understand how important it is for children to have their own space. Carmen replied carefully, sitting on the bed and pulling her daughter into her arms, "But don't worry, your room will stay yours. No one will take it." "And Uncle Ricardo thinks so too?" Lola's voice held concern, and Carmen realized her daughter had heard and understood more than the adults thought. "Of course," came Ricardo's hoarse voice from sleep, turning to them, "Lola, I'm sorry for yesterday. I acted foolishly, but it won't happen again. Your room is your territory, and no one has the right to take it." Lola looked at him carefully with her serious eyes, as if assessing the sincerity of his words, then nodded. "Okay. Are we having breakfast?" This shift from serious matters to everyday concerns, so typical for children, made Carmen smile. Life goes on, despite everything. "Of course we are." She kissed her daughter on the head. "Go wash up, and I'll come in a bit and make something delicious." When Lola left, Carmen turned to her husband. "How are you?" Ricardo looked haggard and guilty. "Terrible. I spent the whole night thinking about what an idiot I am, almost ruining our family because of my cowardice." "But you didn't ruin it," Carmen gently noted, "and I hope you've learned your lesson." "I definitely have." He rubbed his face with his hands. "Mom called this morning, while you were sleeping. She demanded the money, screamed, and threatened court. I told her we'd return the full amount soon, but we won't meet her conditions." "And how did she react?" "She said I'm an ungrateful son and that she didn't expect this from me." He bitterly smiled. Classic manipulation. "I would have felt guilty and backed down immediately before. But after yesterday, after she tried to kick Lola out of her room, I finally saw what she's become." Carmen placed her hand on his shoulder. "She's your mother, Ricardo, and despite everything that's happened, I don't want you to cut ties with her completely. Simply need to set healthy boundaries." "I'm not sure she's capable of respecting them," Ricardo sighed, "but I'll try, for us." The day passed in a strange, suspended state. They went about their usual household chores, finishing up the kitchen renovation, unpacking the remaining boxes from the housewarming, and putting things in place. But with every movement, with every word, there was an underlying tension, as though they were waiting for the next storm to break. By evening, when Lola was watching cartoons in her room and Ricardo and Carmen were having coffee in the kitchen, the doorbell rang. "Are you expecting someone?" Carmen asked cautiously. Ricardo shook his head. "No. Maybe it's the neighbors?" He went to open the door, and Carmen stayed in the kitchen, listening. When she heard that familiar sharp voice, she immediately knew Dolores Garcia had returned. "Mom, what are you doing here?" Ricardo's voice was tense. "I came for my suitcases," Dolores Garcia replied coldly. "Since you don't want me to live with you, at least help me carry them to the taxi." Carmen stepped into the hallway and saw Dolores Garcia standing on the doorstep with an air of offended dignity. Her sharp suit and flawless hairstyle contrasted with Ricardo's tired, disheveled appearance. "Hello, Dolores Garcia," Carmen greeted politely. Dolores Garcia shot her a cold look and deliberately turned away. Ricardo, the suitcases. Ricardo silently walked to the corner of the hallway where he had left his mother's suitcases yesterday. But before he could pick them up, Lola peeked out from the kids' room. "Mom, the cartoon is over," she froze, seeing Dolores Garcia. Dolores Garcia looked at the girl with the same assessing gaze as yesterday and suddenly said something that would change their family's life forever. "Your daughter from your first marriage isn't welcome here." The silence that followed those words seemed almost tangible. Carmen felt the blood rush to her face, her hands trembling with rage and pain. Lola froze in the doorway to her room, eyes wide, her lower lip trembling traitorously. "What did you say?" Ricardo asked quietly, slowly straightening up and leaving the suitcases on the floor. Dolores Garcia apparently didn't notice the shift in his tone, as she continued with the same arrogance. "I said what I think. You tied your life to a woman who already has a child from another man. This isn't your daughter, Ricardo. You're not obligated to care for her, spend your money on her, or give her the best room in the apartment." "Mom," Ricardo's voice sounded unusually firm, even harsh, "I'm asking you to immediately take your suitcases and leave, and never speak like that about Lola again." "You're choosing them over me?" Dolores Garcia threw her hands up. "After everything I've done for you? I dedicated my whole life to you, my whole life. And I'm grateful for that," Ricardo replied, looking her straight in the eye, "but that doesn't give you the right to insult my family. Yes, Lola isn't my biological daughter, but she is part of my family, and I love her. If you can't accept that, it's better we don't see each other for a while." Carmen, without waiting for her mother-in-law's response, stepped towards Lola and hugged her, shielding her from the harsh words. The girl clung to her, trembling but not crying. Dolores Garcia looked at her son as though seeing him for the first time, her gaze mixed with disbelief, anger, and something like fear. "Fine," she finally spoke in an icy tone, "I'll leave, but remember, Ricardo, you made your choice not in favor of your mother. And when this family disappoints you, don't come crying to me." She grabbed one of the suitcases, and after a moment's hesitation, Ricardo took the second one. They silently walked downstairs to the waiting taxi. When Ricardo returned, his face was pale but determined. "I'm sorry," he said to Carmen, "I'm sorry for all this." She shook her head. "You don't have to apologize." Ricardo knelt down in front of Lola. "Lola, what my mom said is not true. You are important to us, to me and Mom. We love you, and you are the most important part of our family. Never, hear me, never believe anyone who says otherwise." Lola looked at him seriously with her big eyes, tears unshed, and nodded. "Really? Even though I'm not your real daughter?" "Real family isn't just about blood." Ricardo carefully took her small hands in his. "It's about love, care, the desire to be together. And by all these rules, you are my real daughter, if you don't mind." Lola suddenly hugged him tightly around his neck. "I don't mind," she whispered in his ear, "not at all." Carmen watched them, feeling a lump rise in her throat. Amid all the chaos and pain, something important had happened, something she had been waiting for months. Lola had finally accepted Ricardo, not just as her mom's husband, but as her new dad. The following weeks were filled with errands and changes. Carmen's parents, as promised, gave them 10,000 euros to partially repay Dolores Garcia's debt. The remaining 5,000 Ricardo took out as a consumer loan. Francisco, using his legal expertise, helped draw up the proper document for repaying the debt and canceling the previous obligations. Ricardo personally took the money and documents to his mother, but the conversation didn't go well. She silently took the envelope and closed the door in front of him. Did she at least look at the documents? Carmen asked anxiously when he returned. She's a lawyer by training, Ricardo sighed. She knows everything is in order. But I'm not sure she'll sign them. Francisco reassured them. The money has already been handed over. There are witnesses to the transfer. Even if she doesn't sign the document, we have enough proof of repayment. And her claims to live in the apartment can be contested. It goes against the family code. Life in the new apartment gradually settled into place. They finished the kitchen renovation, hung family photos in the living room, and bought a new rug for the kids' room. Ricardo turned the guest room into a small office where he and Carmen could work. Lola began calling Ricardo Dad, first shyly, as if trying the word on for size, and then more confidently. Ricardo also changed. He became calmer, more confident, no longer flinched at the sound of the phone ringing. He dedicated all his free time to Carmen and Lola, helping with household chores, teaching the girl to ride a bike, and taking them to parks and museums on weekends. 2 weeks after the incident, Carmen told her husband about her pregnancy, confirming it with a test. "I knew it," Ricardo exclaimed, hugging her. "Your morning sickness, the sleepiness. Oh my God, I'm so happy." "Aren't you scared?" Carmen asked cautiously. "It's still a big responsibility, and we've just gone through so much stress." "This baby is the best thing that could happen," he answered firmly. "You, Lola, and our future child, that's what really matters." He hadn't spoken to Dolores Garcia for almost 2 months, but one evening, she called him. The conversation was short and formal. She asked how he was, and he answered politely. She informed him she had signed the documents and sent them by mail. Neither side apologized or blamed the other. It was just the first step toward possible reconciliation, but now on new terms, with clearly defined boundaries and respect for his choices. "Do you think she'll ever accept us?" Carmen asked when Ricardo told her about the call. "I don't know," he answered honestly, "but now it's her choice, not mine. I made it clear that you and Lola are my family, and that's non-negotiable." Carmen hugged him. "Thank you for finding the strength to stand up to her." "You know what's the strangest thing?" he said, thoughtfully staring out the window. "I've spent my whole life fearing disappointing her, afraid of doing something wrong. And when I finally decided to do things my way, it turned out not to be so scary, that life goes on." Lola's room had changed. Instead of butterfly wallpaper, the walls were now decorated with unicorns. The girl had chosen the new design herself when Ricardo suggested a complete overhaul to erase all the unpleasant memories. "Mom, look what I drew." Lola ran into the room, waving a sheet of paper. "This is our family." Carmen took the drawing, 3 figures holding hands. The larger one had short hair, the middle one had long hair, and the small one had pigtails, with a smaller figure with wings above the clouds. "And who's this?" Carmen asked, pointing to the winged figure. "That's our future brother or sister," Lola explained seriously. "Daddy said, maybe soon we'll have another family member, but for now, they're an angel waiting to come down to us." Carmen smiled, placing her hand on her stomach. Now that they had told their parents about the pregnancy, Ricardo decided to prepare Lola for the arrival of a brother or sister. "You know," she said to her daughter, hugging her, "the angel is already on the way. Soon you'll really have a brother or sister." "Really?" Lola's eyes widened. "And I'll be the big sister?" "The best big sister in the world," Carmen confirmed. The doorbell interrupted their conversation. At the door stood Ricardo with a large pizza box and a bouquet of wildflowers, just like the ones he'd brought on their first meeting. "Hello, my lovely girls." He kissed Carmen and picked up Lola, who had run to him. "How was your day?" "Lola already knows about our surprise," Carmen whispered in his ear. "She says you told her about the angel waiting to come down to us." Ricardo blushed. "I just wanted to prepare her, didn't think she'd take it so literally." "It's okay," Carmen smiled. "I think it's even cute." They went to the kitchen, and Lola immediately began telling her stepdad about her day at kindergarten, her new friend, and the teacher who praised her drawing. Ricardo listened with such genuine interest, as if there were nothing more important than the children's adventures. Carmen watched them and thought how much their life had changed over these months. That awful housewarming, which their friends now jokingly called the housewarming with a surprise, paradoxically became the turning point that made their family stronger. When Lola was already asleep, and they were sitting in the living room, Ricardo suddenly asked, "Do you think we'll be good parents to both kids?" "I'm sure we will." Carmen took his hand. "You're already a great father to Lola, and the baby will be lucky to have such a caring big sister." Sometimes I feel like I don't deserve all this happiness, Ricardo confessed, after almost ruining our family with my cowardice. We all have the right to make mistakes, Carmen gently countered. The important thing is to learn from them, and you've done that. They were silent for a while, looking out the window at the evening city. You know, Carmen suddenly said, when I tell this story to my friends, they laugh and call it the housewarming surprise, but I think the real surprise happened afterward, when you finally found the strength to stand up for our family. Ricardo squeezed her hand tighter. I just suddenly realized that I could lose you, both you and Lola, and that thought turned out to be scarier than the fear of disappointing my mother. And you know what? Carmen turned to him. Lola sometimes asks, why couldn't you say no to your mom? And I don't always know what to answer. Ricardo thought for a moment. Tell her that for some men, it's easier to lose their family than to find their own voice, but I don't want to be that man, not anymore. In the kids' room, Lola stirred loudly, as if she'd had a bad dream. They both listened, ready to go to her if needed. But the girl settled down, and the apartment was once again filled with a warm, homey silence, filled with the feeling of safety and love. Carmen rested her head on her husband's shoulder. And in the hallway, there are no more strangers' suitcases. And there never will be, Ricardo confirmed. This is our home, only ours. They sat like that for a long time, embracing, enjoying the peace and quiet. There would be many challenges ahead, having a baby, paying the mortgage, possibly reconciling with Dolores Garcia if she ever decided to accept them as they were. But right now, at this moment, they were just happy. Husband and wife, who had created their home despite all obstacles. And in Lola's room, on the shelf with her toys, stood her new framed drawing, 3 figures holding hands, and a small angel in the clouds, ready to join them when the time came.
If you're enjoying it as well, leave a like and subscribe to the channel.